Sei Shōnagon, Makura no Soshi, The Pillow Book, Chapter 91. A year after Emperor Unease, death people ceased to wear mourning. It was a most moving time. Everyone from His Majesty himself down to the late Emperor's attendants remembered how things had been when the poet wrote about the flowery clothes. One day when it was raining heavily, a child, whose straw coat made him look like a basket worm, came to Tazemi's room and presented a formal letter attached to a large branch that had been peeled white. "Where does this come from?" said the maid. "Madam is observing abstinence both today and tomorrow. Her shutters are closed." Then, opening the upper part of the shutters, she took in the letter and brought it to her mistress. "It is a day of abstinence," said Tazemi, leaving the letter on top of the lattice. "I cannot possibly read it." On the following morning, Tazemi washed her hands and asked her maid for the account of scrolls. Kneeling down, she took the strange-looking document and slowly opened it. The handwriting, which was traced on heavy, brown paper, was very weak, as though done by some old priest. "Here we keep our somber, oak-dyed clothes in memory of him who died." But in the capital, no doubt, the clothes are changed to brighter hues. Tazemi was extremely shocked and wondered who could have sent it. The Archbishop of Niwa occurred to her as a possibility, yet surely he could not have written such a letter. So who is responsible? It must be the Fujiwara Major Counselor, since he was director of the late Emperor's household. She would have liked to let their majesties know about it at once, but the masters of divination had told her that she must be extremely prudent during the period of abstinence, and she restrained her impatience until the 2 days had passed. On the following morning, she wrote her answer to the poem and sent it to the residence of the Fujiwara Major Counselor, whence a further poem came in reply. Tazemi now hurried off to the Empress, taking along the 2 letters she had received. On arrival, she explained what had happened, and the Emperor, who was in the room at the time, heard everything. Her Majesty glanced indifferently at the letters. "This doesn't look like the writing of the Fujiwara Major Counselor," she said. "It must be from some priest, but who?" said Tazemi. "Who among the high nobility or clergy would do such a thing? Can it be Lord so-and-so? Or perhaps it's Bishop so-and-so?" Seeing Tazemi so perplexed and curious, the Emperor smiled and said, "Your letter reminds me of something I've seen here." Opening a small cupboard, he took out still another letter. "Oh dear. Do tell me what this is all about," said Tazemi insistently. "My head is aching. I really must know." She gave a bitter laugh. Finally, the Emperor spoke. "The demon child who brought you the letter happens to work as an assistant for one of the servants in our kitchen. But I think it may have been Lady Koyo who plotted the whole thing." Now Her Majesty burst out laughing. "Oh," exclaimed Tazemi, tugging at the sleeve of the Empress's robe and shaking it. "How could Your Majesty have played such a trick on me? I never suspected anything like that. Before even opening the letter, I specially washed my hands and knelt down." Tazemi laughed, and I was delighted by the proud, angry look on her face. There was also loud laughter in the kitchen when the servants heard what had happened. Returning to her own apartments, Tazemi sent for the child from the Imperial kitchen and showed him to her maid, who had originally taken the letter. "Yes, that's the boy," said the maid. "Who wrote the letter, child, and who handed it to you?" The boy gave a foolish laugh and ran away without a word. Later, the Fujiwara Major Counselor was told the story and chuckled with delight. Sei Shōnagon, Makura no Soshi, The Pillow Book, Chapter 92. An ugly person with a bad character. Rice starch that has become mixed with water. I know that this is a very vulgar item, and everyone will dislike my mentioning it. But that should not stop me. In fact, I must feel free to include anything, even tongs used for the parting fires. After all, these objects do exist in our world, and people all know about them. I admit they do not belong to a list that others will see. But I never thought that these notes would be read by anyone else, and so I included everything that came into my head, however strange or unpleasant. Sei Shōnagon, Makura no Soshi, The Pillow Book, Chapter 93. What can possibly equal the ceremonies performed in His Majesty's presence on the occasion of the special festivals? The rehearsal is also delightful. A bright sun shone in the peaceful spring sky, and in the garden in front of Serio Palace mats had been spread out by men of the housekeeping office. The Imperial messengers sat facing north, while the dancers faced the Emperor. But perhaps my memory is mistaken on this point. Assistant officials of the Emperor's private office placed little tables in front of each of the noblemen in attendance. One after another, the guests took the bowl, and after holding it for a while poured some of the wine into a thing called a yaku shell and drank. This was followed by the gathering of remains. I find it bad enough to see men doing this, but now to my surprise, a lot of women emerged from the fire. Huts, which I had thought were empty, and began helping themselves to the left-overs in a most unsightly way. The women who roughly pushed themselves forward, determined to take as much as possible, actually got less than the ones who darted out nimbly and snatched the first things they could find. I was much amused to see how cleverly they used the little huts as storerooms for their spoils. As soon as the men from the housekeeping office had removed the mats, some workers arrived from the office of grounds, each carrying a broom, and leveled off the sand in the garden. On the day of the rehearsal, even the musicians are allowed to come and go freely in His Majesty's presence. As they reached the front of Shakyo Palace, one could hear the sound of their flutes and of the wooden clappers beating time. I impatiently waited for them to arrive at Serio Palace. Presently they emerged by the side of the fence that surrounds the bamboo garden. They were singing Udo Beach to the strumming of their zithers, and seeing them, I could hardly control my joy. Now 2 of the dancers ran forward to start the first dance. They stood facing the Emperor, with the sleeves of their robes joined in exactly the right way. The other dancers came out one by one, tapping their feet in time with the music. Having adjusted their costumes, the cords of their short-sleeved jackets, the collar of their over-robes, their head, dress, and the rest, they began dancing to the accompaniment of the Little Pines and other such songs. It was really splendid, and I could gladly have watched them all day as they danced, moving their wide sleeves like great wheels. I felt very sorry when they had finished, but consoled myself with the thought that there was another dance to come. I was disappointed, however, for now the musicians walked off, carrying their zithers on their shoulders, and the performers immediately danced behind the bamboos. They made a most elegant picture as they glided gracefully away, their cloaks removed from one shoulder to let the sleeve hang down, and the long trains of their glossy silk under, robes stretching out in all directions and becoming entwined with each other. But I am afraid it all seems rather commonplace when put into words. Now they had gone, and I was left with the sad thought that there would be no more dancing that day. The high court nobles and others who had been watching also left, making me feel very forlorn and regretful. Things are different when the special festival is held at Kamo, for then one can look forward to the sacred dance of the return. I remember one such evening. As the smoke rose in slender wisps from the bonfires in the garden, I listened to the clear, delicate, charmingly tremulous sound of the flute that accompanied the sacred dances. The singing also moved me greatly. Delighted by the scene, I hardly noticed that the air was piercingly cold, that my robes of beaten silk were icy, and that the hand in which I held my fan was almost frozen. Afterwards, the director summoned the dancers, and I enjoyed seeing how pleased he looked when they came running towards him. When I am staying at home, I am not satisfied with simply watching the procession, as it passes on its way back from the shrine in the evening. Often, I will go all the way to Kamo to see the dances. On arrival, I tell my men to place the carriage under the great trees. The smoke of the pine torches trails along the ground, and by their light the cords of the dancers, jackets, and the luster of their silken robes look even more beautiful than in the daytime. It is delightful, too, when the dancers move in rhythm with the sacred songs, stamping their feet on the boards of the wooden bridge. The sound of running water blends with the music of the flute, and surely even the gods must enjoy such a scene. Among the dancers was a certain captain in the inner palace guards who performed every year on this occasion, and who had always impressed me greatly. He had recently died, and I had heard that his spirit was haunting the first bridge at the upper shrine. I found the idea very frightening, and did not think that I should be able to enjoy the dances fully. Yet, when the time came, I was totally absorbed by their beauty. "It is always so sad when the special festival at Iwashimizu comes to an end," remarked one of the ladies in waiting. "Why don't the dancers give a repeat performance after they return to the palace? What a delight that would be. I find it such a shame to see the dancers leaving one after another as soon as they've received their rewards." Hearing this, the emperor said that he would summon the dancers after they returned on the following day and order them to perform. "Will you really do that, Your Majesty?" said the lady. "Oh, how splendid!" The ladies in waiting were all delighted with this decision, and they crowded round Her Majesty, begging her to make sure that the emperor would not change his mind. As a result, we had the great pleasure of seeing the dancers give a special performance on their return from the shrine. The ladies, however, had not really expected that the extra dance would really take place, and when they heard that the dancers had been summoned into the presence, they were not prepared. In their eagerness to reach the hall, they bumped into things and behaved in the most insane way. Those who had been in their rooms when the news came rushed helter-skelter to the palace, and not caring in the slightest that they could be seen by courtiers, attendants, and others whom they passed, lifted their skirts over their heads as they ran. No wonder that people laughed at them. Sei Shōnagon, Makura no Soshi, The Pillow Book, Chapter 94. When His Excellency, the Chancellor, had departed from among us, there was much stir and movement in the world. Her Majesty, who no longer came to the Imperial Palace, lived in the smaller palace of the Second Ward. Though I had done nothing to deserve it, things became very difficult for me, and I spent a long time at home. One day, when I was particularly concerned about Her Majesty and felt I could not allow our separation to continue, the captain of the Left Guards Division came to see me. "I called on Her Majesty today," he said, "and found it very moving." Her ladies were dressed as elegantly as ever, with their robes, skirts, and Chinese jackets perfectly matching the season. The blind was open at the side, and when I looked in, I saw a group of about 8 ladies, elegantly seated next to each other. They wore Chinese jackets of tawny yellow, light violet skirts, and robes of purple and dark red. Noticing that the grass in the garden outside the palace had been allowed to grow very high and thick, I told them they should have it cut. "We've left it like this on purpose, so that we might admire the dew when it settles on the blades." The voice was Lady Seisho's, and I found her reply delightful. "Several of the ladies spoke about you, and said it was a shame you were staying at home. Now that Her Majesty is living in a place like this," they told me, "she feels that Shonagon should come back into waiting regardless of what business she may have at home. Why won't she return when Her Majesty wants her so much? I definitely had the impression that they wanted me to pass this on to you. So please go. There's a charm about the place that will stir you deeply. The peonies in front of the terrace have a delightful Chinese air." "No," I replied. "Since they dislike me so much, I've come to dislike them. You must try to be generous," he said with a smile. Shortly afterwards, I visited the Empress. I had no way of telling what she thought about it all, but I did hear some of her ladies, in waiting whisper, "She is on close terms with people who are attached to the minister of the left." I was coming from my room when I saw them all standing there muttering to each other. Noticing me, they became silent, and each of them went about her own business. I was not used to being treated like this, and found it most galling. Thereafter, Her Majesty summoned me on several occasions, but I paid no attention, and a long time passed without my visiting her. No doubt the ladies in waiting made out that I belonged to the enemy camp and told all sorts of lies about me. One day, when there had been an unaccustomed silence from the Empress, and I was sitting at home sunk in gloomy thoughts, a housekeeper brought me a letter. Her Majesty ordered that this should be sent to you secretly by Lady Sakyo, she told me. Yet there could be no reason for such secrecy when I was living at home. Examining the letter, I gathered that it was a personal message from Her Majesty, and my heart was pounding as I opened it. There was nothing written on the paper. It had been used to wrap up a single petal of mountain rose, on which I read the words, "He who does not speak his love." I was overjoyed. What a relief after the long, anxious days of silence. My eyes filled with the things that one knows first of all. "The ladies in waiting are all wondering why you have stayed away so long," said the housekeeper, who had been watching me. "They consider it very strange, especially since you know how much Her Majesty is always thinking of you." "Why don't you go?" Then she added, "I have a short errand nearby. I'll be back for your answer presently." But as I prepared to write my answer, I realized that I had completely forgotten the next line of the poem. "Amazing," I muttered. How can one possibly forget an old poem like that? I know it perfectly well, and yet it just won't come. Hearing this, a small page, boy who happened to be in the room said, "Yet feels its waters seething underneath. Those are the words, madam." Of course. How on earth could they have slipped my mind? To think that I should have to be taught by a mere child. Shortly after sending my reply, I visited the Empress. Not knowing how she would receive me, I felt unusually nervous and remained half hidden behind a curtain of state. "Are you a newcomer here?" asked Her Majesty with a laugh. "I am afraid it was not much of a poem," she went on, "but I felt it was the sort of thing I should write. When I do not see you, Shonagon, I am wretched all the time." Her Majesty had not changed. When I told her about the page boy who had reminded me of the missing words, she was most amused. "That's just the sort of thing that can happen," she said, laughing, "especially with old poems that one considers too familiar to take seriously." Then she told me the following story. Some people were organizing a game of riddles when one of them, a clever man and a good player, said that he would like to set the first riddle presented by the team of the left, to which he belonged. His team mates cheerfully agreed, feeling confident that he would produce something good. When all the people in the team of the left had made up their riddles, they began to select the ones that would actually be used. "Please tell us what yours is going to be," they said to the man. "No," he replied. "You must simply trust me." After speaking as I did, I am hardly likely to come out with something that will disappoint you. His teammates assumed that he must be right, but when the day of the game drew near, they again asked him to let them know his riddle. "What if you should have produced something very strange?" they said. "Well," he said angrily, "I don't know." "If you are so uncertain about my riddle, you had better not depend on me at all." When the day arrived, his partners were very worried about what he would do. The participants, men and women of quality including several senior courtiers, were divided into two teams and seated in rows. The time came to present the first set of riddles, and our man was chosen to lead off for the team of the left. He looked as if he had prepared his entry with great care, and all the players gazed at him anxiously, wondering what they would hear. "Your riddle. Your riddle," they said impatiently. Finally, he came out with a bow drawn in the sky, which delighted the members of the opposing team. His partners were dumbfounded and disgusted with him. Surely, they thought, he must be working for the other side and trying to make his own team lose. Meanwhile, his opponent on the team of the right was laughing at him. "Dear me," he said, beginning to pout. "I haven't the slightest idea." And instead of answering the riddle, he began making jokes. "I've won," cried the man who had posed the riddle. "A point for our side." A token was duly given to the team of the left. "Disgraceful," said the members of the other team. "Everyone knows the answer to that riddle. They certainly shouldn't get a point." "But he said he did not know," replied the man. "How can you claim he hasn't lost?" In this, and in each of the subsequent contests, he argued so effectively that his side won. Later, the player who had failed to answer the first riddle was being taken to task by his teammates. "We admit," they said, "that people can forget the answers to the most obvious questions and have to concede defeat. But what possible reason could you have to say you didn't know?" And they made him pay a forfeit. When the Empress had finished her story, all the ladies burst out laughing. "The people on the team of the right had good reason to be annoyed with their man," said one of them. "I can see why they were disappointed." And how furious the other team must have been to hear their candidate lead off with such a silly riddle. Indeed, I thought, how could anyone possibly forget something so simple and commonplace? Sei Shōnagon, Makura no Soshi, The Pillow Book, Chapter 95. On the 10th day of the first month, there were thick clouds in the sky, but the sun shone through brightly. In a rough, uncultivated field behind a poor dwelling, house grew a young peach tree. Little branches sprouted thickly all over it. I noticed that the leaves were green on one side, while on the other they were dark and glossy, as if colored with a deep red dye. A slender youth, with beautiful hair and wearing a torn hunting costume, had climbed the tree. At the foot stood a little boy. He had on short clogs, and over a plum red under robe he wore a white hunting costume tucked up so that it bulged at the waist. "Come on," he called to the youth in the tree. "Cut me a nice branch." Just then a small group of girls arrived. They too had pretty hair and their jackets were torn. Though their skirts were faded, the colors still looked quite attractive. "Please cut us some branches," they shouted to the lad. "Choose some that we can make into nice hair, sticks. Master sent us for them." When the youth in the tree started to throw down branches, the children ran for them helter-skelter, each taking her share and crying, "Lots for me. Lots for me." It was a delightful scene. Then a man in a dirty trouser skirt came running along and said that he too wanted some branches. The boy asked him to wait for a moment, whereupon the man began shaking the tree. The boy was terrified and clung on like a monkey, which I found most amusing. One is likely to come across similar scenes when the plum trees start bearing fruit. Sei Shōnagon, Makura no Soshi, The Pillow Book, Chapter 96. Two handsome men are absorbed in a game of backgammon. Though they have been playing all day, they still do not seem tired and order a servant to light the lamp on a short stand. One of the players holds the dice in his hand, and before finally placing them in the box, prays earnestly for a good throw. The other player puts his dice box on the board. As he sits there waiting, he tucks in the collar of his hunting costume, which has begun to creep up over his face, and shakes his sagging lacquered cap. How could anyone possibly lose after reciting all those charms? He seems to be saying as he stares impatiently at his opponent. What a proud look he has. A high-ranking gentleman is about to start a game of Go. He loosens the sash of his cloak, and with a negligent air picks up the stones from his box and starts placing them on the board. Meanwhile, his opponent, who is of lower rank, sits respectfully at some distance from the board, bending forward, and each time that he reaches out to place a stone, he has to push aside his sleeve with the other hand. It is a delightful scene. Sei Shōnagon, Makura no Soshi, The Pillow Book, Chapter 97. An earthen cup. A new metal bowl. A rush mat. The play of the light on water as one pours it into a vessel. A new wooden chest. Sei Shōnagon, Makura no Soshi, The Pillow Book, Chapter 98. A rat's nest. Someone who is late in washing his hands in the morning. White snivel and children who sniffle as they walk. The containers used for oil. Little sparrows. A person who does not bathe for a long time, even though the weather is hot. All faded clothes give me an unclean feeling, especially those that have glossy colors. Sei Shōnagon, Makura no Soshi, The Pillow Book, Chapter 99. The face of a child, drawn on a melon. A baby sparrow that comes hopping up when one imitates the squeak of a mouse. Or again, when one has tied it with a thread round its leg, and its parents bring insects or worms and pop them in its mouth. Delightful. A baby of 2 or so is crawling rapidly along the ground. With his sharp eyes, he catches sight of a tiny object, and picking it up with his pretty little fingers, takes it to show to a grown-up person. A child whose hair has been cut like a nun's is examining something. The hair falls over his eyes, but instead of brushing it away, he holds his head to the side. The pretty white cords of his skirt are tied round his shoulders, and this too is most adorable. A young palace page, who is still quite small, walks by in ceremonial costume. One picks up a pretty baby and holds him for a while in one's arms. While one is fondling him, he clings to one's neck and then falls asleep. The objects used during the display of dolls. One picks up a tiny lotus leaf that is floating on a pond and examines it. Not only lotus leaves, but little hollyhock flowers, and indeed all small things, are most adorable. An extremely plump baby, who is about a year old and has a lovely white skin, comes crawling towards one, dressed in a long gauze robe of violet with the sleeves tucked up. A little boy of about 8, who reads aloud from a book in his childish voice. Pretty white chicks who are still not fully fledged and look as if their clothes are too short for them. Cheeping loudly, they follow one on their long legs or walk close to the mother hen. Duck eggs. An urn containing the relics of some holy person. Wild pinks. Sei Shōnagon, Makura no Soshi, The Pillow Book, Chapter 100. A child who has nothing particular to recommend him, yet is used to being spoilt by people. Coughing. One is about to say something to a person who is obviously embarrassed, but then he speaks first, very strange. A child of about 4, whose parents live nearby, comes to one's house and behaves mischievously. He picks up one's things, scatters them about the place, and damages them. As a rule, he is held in check and cannot do as he wishes, but when his mother is with him, he feels that he can assert himself. "Let me see that, Mama," he says, tugging at her skirts and pointing to some coveted object. The mother tells him that she is talking to grown-up people and pays no more attention to him, whereupon the child manages to take hold of the object by himself, picks it up, and examines it. Oh, how hateful. Instead of snatching the thing from him and hiding it, the mother simply says, "You naughty child." Then she adds with a smile, "You mustn't do that. You'll damage it, you know." The mother is hateful too. Since it would be unseemly to say anything, one has to sit there in silence, anxiously watching the child. Sei Shōnagon, no Soshi, The Pillow Book, Chapter 101. The back of a piece of embroidery. The inside of a cat's ear. A swarm of mice who still have no fur when they come wriggling out of their nest. The seams of a fur robe that has not yet been lined. Darkness in a place that does not give the impression of being very clean. A rather unattractive woman who looks after a large brood of children. A woman who falls ill and remains unwell for a long time. In the mind of her lover, who is not particularly devoted to her, she must appear rather squalid. Sei Shōnagon, no Soshi, The Pillow Book, Chapter 102. The nurse looking after a baby who cries at night. A man with two mistresses who is obliged to see them being bitter and jealous towards each other. An exorcist who has to deal with an obstinate spirit. He hopes that his incantations will take effect quickly, but often he is disappointed and has to persevere, praying that after all his efforts he will not end up as a laughing stock. A woman passionately loved by a man who is absurdly jealous. The powerful men who serve in the first place never seem to be at ease, though one would imagine that they had a pleasant enough life. Nervous people. Sei Shōnagon, no Soshi, The Pillow Book, Chapter 103. One has been learning a sacred text by heart, but though one has gone over the same passage again and again, one still recites it haltingly and keeps on forgetting words. Meanwhile, one hears other people, not only clerics, for whom it is natural, but ordinary men and women, reciting such passages without the slightest effort, and one wonders when one will ever be able to come up to their standard. When one is ill in bed and hears people walking about, laughing loudly and chatting away as if they did not have a care in the world, how enviable they seem. Once on the day of the horse in the 2nd month, I decided to visit Inari. By the time I had reached the middle shrine, I was already worn out. Yet I kept going and was on my way to the upper shrine when a group of people passed me. Though they had evidently started after I did, they strode briskly up the hill without the slightest look of discomfort, very enviable. I had made haste to leave at dawn, but by the hour of the snake, I was still only halfway to the top. To make matters worse, it was gradually becoming hot, and I felt really wretched. When I stopped to rest, I began crying from exhaustion and wondered why I had come on this pilgrimage when there were so many people who had never even thought of making the effort. Just then, I saw a woman in her 30s walking down the hill. She was not wearing a traveling costume, but had simply tucked up the bottom of her skirts. "I am making the pilgrimage 7 times today," she declared to the people she met on her way. "I've been up 3 times already, and there won't be any trouble about the other 4 times. I have to be back by the hour of the sheep." She was a woman I could hardly have noticed if I had met her anywhere else, but at that moment I wished I could change places with her. I greatly envy people who have nice children, whether they grow up to be priests or become ordinary men and women. Women who have beautiful hair with tresses that fall splendidly over their shoulders. People of high rank who are always surrounded by respectful attendants are most enviable. People who have a good hand, who are skillful at composing poems, and who are always chosen first when there is a letter to be written. Several women are attending a lady of quality who wishes a letter to be written on her behalf to an important person. Obviously, many of them are suited for the task. It is not likely that all her women will have writing as feeble as the tracks of a bird's feet. Yet the lady especially summons a woman who is not in the room, and producing her own inkstone, tells her to write the letter. This is bound to make the others envious. The fortunate woman may be one of the older members of the household, whose writing is of the most elementary kind. Yet she will set herself to the task with enthusiasm. On the other hand, she may be an experienced calligrapher, Perhaps the letter is going to some high court noble, or possibly it is intended to introduce a young woman who is hoping to take service in the palace. The writer is instructed to do her very best, and she begins by carefully selecting the paper. Meanwhile, her fellow attendants gather round and make envious jokes. On first learning the zither or the flute, one is extremely envious of experienced players and wonders when one will ever reach that stage. The nurse of the emperor or of the crown prince. The women in the palace who are privileged to see His Majesty's consorts. People who can afford to build their own chapel of meditation and pray there in the evening and at dawn. When one's opponent has a lucky throw of dice in backgammon, he is most enviable. A saint who has really given up all thoughts of the world. Sei Shōnagon, Makura no Soshi, The Pillow Book, Chapter 104. Rolled dyeing, uneven shading, and all other forms of dappled dyeing. When a woman has just had a child, one is in a hurry to find out whether it is a boy or a girl. If she is a lady of quality, one is obviously most curious. But even if she is a servant or someone else of humble station, one still wants to know. Early in the morning, on the first day of the period of official appointments, one is eager to hear whether a certain acquaintance will receive his governorship. A letter from the man one loves. Sei Shōnagon, Makura no Soshi, The Pillow Book, Chapter 105. While we were in mourning for the Chancellor, Her Majesty had to leave the palace on the occasion of the Great Purification at the end of the 6th month. Since the Empress's office lay in an unlucky direction, she proceeded to the dining hall of the High Court nobles. It was terribly hot that first evening, and so dark that one could not see anything. We spent a rather anxious night in our cramped quarters. On the following morning, when we got up and looked about, we found that the building was a low, flat structure with a tiled roof that gave it a peculiar Chinese air. There were none of the usual lattices, only bamboo blinds hanging down all round the room. Yet the place was strangely charming. While we were staying there, I and the other ladies in waiting used to go into the garden for a walk every morning. Conspicuous among the plants were the masses of flowers known as yellow day, lilies which grew along the bamboo fence and looked just right in front of this particular building. The time office was directly next door, and the gong sounded different from usual. Some of the younger ladies in our group were curious to hear it, and one day about 20 of them ran over to the building and climbed the high bell tower. I stayed at the bottom and looked up at them. As they stood there in their light gray skirts, Chinese jackets, matching dresses of unlined silk, and scarlet petticoats, they really looked as if they might have descended from heaven, though one could hardly have called them angels. I also enjoyed watching the faces of some of the other ladies, who, though quite as young as the ones in the tower, could not join them because of their own superior rank, and were looking up at them enviously. When the sun had set, the older women joined the younger ones under the cover of darkness, and they all set off for the guard house. It appears that, when they arrived there, they played about and laughed so noisily that the guard house attendants became angry. "What a way to behave!" they exclaimed, and accused the ladies of having climbed into the chairs normally occupied by the high court nobles, and of having upset and damaged the benches used by the members of the Great Council of State. But the women paid no attention. Perhaps because the building was very old and covered with tiles, it became unspeakably hot at night, and we slept outside the blinds. All day long, centipedes kept falling from the ceiling, this also because the building was so old, and great droves of hornets flew into our room. This we found very frightening. Every day senior courtiers came to call, and often they stayed talking until late at night. When one of them heard a lady in waiting say something about the dining hall, he delighted us by reciting, "Who would have believed it?" that the grounds of the Great Council would so soon become a pleasure garden. Autumn came, but in our cramped quarters no cooling wind was wafted from any side. We could, however, hear the sound of the autumn insects. On the eve of the Empress's return to the palace on the 8th, the 2 stars seemed closer than usual. This too was no doubt because the building and its garden were so cramped. Sei Shōnagon, Makura no Soshi, The Pillow Book, Chapter 106. One day Captain Tadanobu, the Imperial advisor, came to call in the company of Captain Nobukata. I went out on the veranda with some of the other ladies waiting, and we chatted with the 2 gentlemen. In the course of our conversation, I suddenly asked Tadanobu, "Which poem will you be reciting tomorrow?" "Why, of course," he answered after a moment's thought, "it will be the one about the 4th month in this world of men." I was delighted that he should have remembered an old poem like this, and that he should have replied so adroitly. Unlike women, men are liable to forget old poems, even the ones they have written themselves, and so I was especially impressed by Tadanobu's feat. The illusion, of course, was lost on the other women behind the screen and on Captain Nobukata, who was standing in front. Sei Shōnagon, Makura no Soshi, The Pillow Book, Chapter 107. It was late at night on the same day, the last of the 3rd month. There had been a large number of senior courtiers next to the first door of the long corridor in the palace, but one by one they had slipped away, and now no one remained but the captain first secretary, Tadanobu, Captain Nobukata of the Minamotos, and a certain chamberlain of the 6th rank. They spoke about all sorts of things, chanted passages from the sutras, and recited Japanese poems. "Now the night is over," declared Tadanobu. "Let us go home," and he added the line, "The tears they shed on parting will turn to dew when morning comes." Nobukata joined him in reciting the poem, and it was delightful to hear them. "She really is in a hurry, that weaver of yours," I remarked. "I thought of that quotation on the spur of the moment," replied Tadanobu, looking very cross. "The situation happened to remind me of a parting at dawn." "What a shame that you should have to tease us like that." "In this palace, one is always sorry when one has made some inadvertent remark." Since it was becoming very light, Tadanobu added, "It is impossible for the god of Kazuaraki to remain here any longer." And the gentlemen made their way home through the thick grass in the garden. When the time actually came for the Tanabata festival, I hoped to be able to say something about this conversation. In the meantime, however, Tadanobu had become an imperial advisor, and it seemed unlikely that I would see him. I planned to write a letter that might be delivered by someone from the Office of Grounds, but I was pleasantly surprised to receive a personal visit from him on the 7th of the month. Would Tadanobu remember our conversation? If I brought it up casually, he would no doubt put his head to the side with a questioning look, and I should have to remind him of what had been said. As it turned out, he replied without the slightest hesitation, and this really delighted me. For months I had been wondering when our conversation would be mentioned again. Here, I am afraid, my fanciful nature was at work, and now I was most impressed to find that he had remembered everything and prepared his answer. Nobukata, who like Tadanobu had been annoyed on the previous occasion, again accompanied him on this visit, but obviously remembered nothing. "Really?" Tadanobu exclaimed. "Do you mean to say you've forgotten how she criticized me at dawn that day?" "Ah, to be sure," replied Nobukata, laughing most pathetic. In our discussion of men and women, Tadanobu and I often used the terminology of go. Thus, when we wanted to imply that two people were on intimate terms, we would say that they had yielded their hands or filled up the spaces. Or again, we would use expressions like, "He's going to keep his hand," or "The time has come to part the pieces," meaning so, and so has become far too familiar. In this way, we could understand each other without letting anyone else know what we had in mind. Nobukata heard about our language, and one day he came up to me and inquired what it was all about. Since I refused to tell him, he went to Tadanobu and reproachfully asked him for an explanation. Out of regard for their friendship, Tadanobu let him into the secret. Nobukata now anxiously awaited a chance to display his new knowledge. One day he came to our building and asked to speak to me. "Is there a go board here?" he began. "What would you say if I too wanted to play? Would you yield your hand to me? I am just as good as Tadanobu, you know. You mustn't discriminate against me." "If I played like that," I replied, "people could well speak of a roving eye." When Nobukata told Tadanobu about this, he was delighted that I had given a happy answer. Yes, I really like people who remember things. One day, after Tadanobu's promotion to the rank of Imperial Advisor had been decided, I was in His Majesty's presence. "Tadanobu is wonderful at reciting Chinese poetry," I said. "Now that he has been promoted, who is going to be left to give us lines like H. Sairo of Qi, Kai, having visited the ancient tomb? Your Majesty had better make sure that he continues coming here, even if it means that he has to wait a little longer for his new post. It would be too sad to lose him." The Emperor burst out laughing. "I shall tell him what you have said," he replied, "and I shall withhold the appointment." Tadanobu received his promotion all the same. I was feeling very sorry about this when one day Nobukata came to see me. By now he was convinced that he was in no way Tadanobu's inferior and gave himself great airs. I spoke to him about Tadanobu and said, "He can recite the Chinese poem, had not yet reached the term of 30 in a delightfully original way. But why shouldn't I be just as good? In fact, I shall try to do it even better." So saying, Nobukata recited the poem in question. "That's not bad at all," I said when he had finished. "Oh dear," said Nobukata. "Why can't I recite it as well as he does?" "There's a particular charm," I explained, "in the way Tadanobu recites the passage about the term of 30. At this, Nobukata left with a bitter chuckle. Some time later, when Tadanobu was visiting the headquarters of the inner palace guards, Nobukata made a point of seeing him and reported what I had said, requesting that he teach him the passage. Tadanobu laughingly agreed. I was unaware of all this when one day I heard someone reciting verse outside my room. The style was remarkably like Tadanobu's. "Who's that?" I called out in surprise. It was Nobukata who replied. "You'll be amazed," he said. "Yesterday, Tadanobu visited our guard house and I asked him to let me hear how he recited poetry. As soon as he had done so, I was able to say the verses in a way that everyone found extremely similar to his. Just now, when you asked who was there, you certainly did not sound as if you found my style unattractive. I was delighted to think that he had made this special effort, and since he had now begun to recite the precise poem that I had mentioned earlier, I went out and spoke to him. I owe this new talent of mine to Tadanobu, he said when he saw me. I should turn in his direction and make obeisance. Thereafter, though I often avoided people who came to visit me in my room, my usual excuse being that I was on duty in the palace, I was always at home to Nobukata when he arrived reciting his poem. I told the Empress the story, and she was much amused. One day, during an imperial abstinence at the palace, Nobukata ordered a certain clerk in the right division of the inner palace guards, his name was Mitsu something, or other, to bring me a letter. It was written on a double sheet of Michinoku paper and said, I had intended to come and see you today, but was prevented by the imperial abstinence. What do you think of? Had not yet reached the term of 30. I believe you must already have got beyond that term, I replied. Indeed, you must by now be as old as Chu Mai, Chen, when he admonished his wife. Once again, Nobukata was annoyed, and he reported my answer to the emperor, who in turn discussed it with the Empress when he visited her. "How could Shonagon possibly know such a thing?" he said, laughing. Shu Mai Chen was over 40 when he reprimanded his wife, and it makes Nobukata sad that someone should have written to him like that. When I heard about this, I was convinced that Nobukata had taken leave of his senses. Sei Shōnagon, Makura no Soshi, The Pillow Book, Chapter 108. The name Kakaidan was given to the Imperial lady, who was the daughter of the major captain of the left division residing in Cannon Palace. In her service was a lady called Sakyo, the daughter of a woman by the name of Uchifushi, lying down, who was loved by Nobukata and courted by him. People used to laugh at him about this liaison. One day Nobukata came to the Empress's office, where Her Majesty was then residing. "I should have stood night watch here from time to time," he told her, "but your Majesty's ladies have not treated me properly, and so I have been avoiding this place. If only I had been assigned to the night duty room in the palace, I should faithfully have carried out my responsibilities." The other ladies agreed with him, but I interrupted and said, "Yes, indeed. Some people like to have a place where they can lie down and rest. When they have found such a place, they go there all the time. But as for coming here, I shall never tell you anything again," said Nobukata in a voice that was both solemn and bitter. "I confided in you as a friend, but you have treated the matter as if it were common gossip." "Very odd," I replied. "What on earth have I said?" "There was nothing in my remark that you could possibly object to." When I nudged the lady next to me, she turned to Nobukata with a laugh and said, "Yes, why should you be so annoyed by a harmless remark?" "No doubt Shonagon put you up to saying that," exclaimed Nobukata furiously. "I dislike hearing other people gossip," I said, "and I certainly don't go in for that sort of thing myself." With this, the other ladies and I all left. A few days later, Nobukata again addressed me bitterly. "You have been spreading shameful things about me," he said, "when all along it was a story concocted by some of the senior courtiers to make people laugh at me." "In that case," I replied, "it would appear that I am not the only one to blame. Really, I find your attitude very strange." Thereafter, Nobukata broke entirely with Sakyo. Sei Shōnagon, Makura no Soshi, The Pillow Book, Chapter 109. Festivals celebrated near the palace. Relations between brothers, sisters, and other members of a family who do not love each other. The zigzag path leading up to the temple at Kurama. The last day of the 12th month and the first of the first. Sei Shōnagon, Makura no Soshi, The Pillow Book, Chapter 110. Paradise. The course of a boat. Relations between a man and a woman. Sei Shōnagon, Makura no Soshi, The Pillow Book, Chapter 111. Officials in the Ministry of Ceremonial, the left division of the Outer Palace Guards, and the Office of Scribes are delighted to belong to the 5th rank, but it is hardly a position that chamberlains of the 6th rank would covet. A man who has been awarded the head, dress of nobility, and who serves as a provisional governor or in some other 5th rank post, usually lives in a small, shingled house. Sometimes he will surround it with a new fence made of strips of cypress, next to which he will build a shelter for carriages, and he will tether his oxen to the trees that cluster directly in front of the house and let them graze there, all very hateful. He is also likely to have an attractive garden, and inside the house, iyo blinds suspended by cords of purple leather and sliding doors that have been covered with material. At night, he gives instructions that the main gate should be securely closed. Considering that he is a man without the slightest prospects in life, all this show is most distasteful. An official of this rank should not have his own house at all. So long as no uncle or elder brother is already living there, he had better stay with his parents, or, of course, with his parents-in-law. Alternatively, it is quite proper for him to live in a house whose owner is absent, or in the house of a close friend who is serving in the provinces and has no use for it. If none of this is possible, he can always arrange to stay for a while in one of the many houses that belong to imperial princesses or to the children of the Empress Dowager. Then, when he has obtained a good post for himself, he can move into a more permanent place. Sei Shōnagon, Makura no Soshi, The Pillow Book, Chapter 112. When a woman lives alone, her house should be extremely dilapidated, the mud wall should be falling to pieces, and if there is a pond, it should be overgrown with water plants. It is not essential that the garden be covered with sage, brush, but weeds should be growing through the sand in patches, for this gives the place a poignantly desolate look. I greatly dislike a woman's house when it is clear that she has scurried about with a knowing look on her face, arranging everything just as it should be, and when the gate is kept tightly shut. Sei Shōnagon, Makura no Soshi, The Pillow Book, Chapter 113. When a court lady is on leave from the palace, it is pleasant if she can stay with her parents. While she is there, people are always coming and going. There is a lot of noisy conversation in the back rooms, and the clatter of horses, hoofs resounds outside. Yet she is in no danger of being criticized. Things are very different if she is staying in someone else's house. Let us suppose that a man comes to visit the lady, either openly or in secret. He stands by the front gate and says to her, "I did not know you were at home, else I should certainly have called on you before. When will you return to court?" If it is a man she has set her heart on, the lady cannot possibly leave him standing outside, and she opens the front door for him. Then, to her great annoyance, she hears the owner of the house, who has evidently decided that there is too much noise and that it is dangerous to leave the door unbolted so late at night. "Has the outer gate been closed?" he asks the porter. "No, sir," says the latter in a disgruntled tone. "There's still a visitor in the house. Well, be sure to close it as soon as he's left. There have been a lot of burglaries recently. This is especially irking for the lady since the man who is with her can hear everything. Meanwhile, the servants are constantly peeping in to see whether the guest is getting ready to leave, much to the amusement of the attendants who have accompanied him on his visit. Then the attendants start imitating the owner's voice. Oh, what a scolding there would be if he heard them. Sometimes the lady will receive visits from a man who does not show any tender feelings for her in either his looks or his words. Presumably, he must care for her, else why would he continue his visits night after night? Nevertheless, the man may turn out to be quite harmless and will leave her saying, "It's really getting late. And I suppose it is rather dangerous to keep the gate open at this hour." One can tell if a man really loves one, because he will insist on staying all night however much one may urge him to leave. Time after time, the night watchman has made his rounds, and now he exclaims in a very audible voice, "Good heavens! The dawn has come, as if it were so surprising, and someone's gone and left the gate wide open all night. Such carelessness." Then he securely bolts the gate, though it is now light and there is no need for such precautions. How unpleasant it all is. Yes, things are a great deal better when one is staying with one's own parents. Parents-in-law, however, are the most awkward of all, since one is always worrying about what they are going to think. I imagine that it must also be difficult to stay with an elder brother. What I really like is a house where no one cares about the gate either in the middle of the night or at dawn, and where one is free to meet one's visitor, whether he be an imperial prince or a gentleman from the palace. In the winter, one can stay awake together all night with the lattices wide open. When the time comes for him to leave, One has the pleasure of watching him playing upon his flute as he goes. If a bright moon is still hanging in the sky, it is a particular delight. After he has disappeared, one does not go to bed at once but stays up, discussing the visitor with one's companions and exchanging poems. Then gradually one falls asleep. Sei Shōnagon, Makura no Soshi, The Pillow Book, Chapter 114. It is delightful when there has been a thin fall of snow, or again when it has piled up very high, and in the evening we sit round a brazier at the edge of the veranda with a few congenial friends, chatting till darkness falls. There is no need for the lamp, since the snow itself reflects a clear light. Raking the ashes in the brazier with a pair of fire tongs, we discuss all sorts of moving and amusing things. It already seems to be quite late at night when we hear the sound of footsteps. We all look up, wondering who it may be. A man is approaching, the type of man that often visits us unannounced on such occasions. "I was wondering how you ladies were enjoying today's snow," he says. "I had intended to come and see you earlier, but I was held up all day in some other place." "Ah," says one of us, and quotes the poem about the man who came today. Then, with a great deal of laughter, we begin talking about what has happened since the morning and about all sorts of other things. The visitor has been offered a round cushion, but he prefers to sit on the wooden veranda with one leg hanging over the edge. The conversation goes on until the bell announces that dawn has come. The ladies sitting behind the blinds and the man in front feel that they still have many things to tell each other, but he has to be off before daylight. As he gets ready to leave, he charmingly recites, "Snow lay upon such and such hills." Then he is gone. If he had not been there, we should certainly not have stayed up all night like this. It was he who made the occasion so delightful, and now we start discussing what an elegant man he is. Sei Shōnagon, Makura no Soshi, The Pillow Book, Chapter 115. One evening during the reign of Emperor Murakami, when it had been snowing very heavily, and the moon was shining brightly, His Majesty ordered that some snow be heaped onto a platter. Then a branch of plum blossom was stuck into it, and the emperor told someone to hand the platter to Hayo, the lady chamberlain. "Let us have a poem about this," he said to her. "What will you give us?" "The moon, the snow, the flowers," she replied, much to His Majesty's delight. "To have composed a special poem for the occasion," he said, "would have been the ordinary thing to do. But to find a line that fits the moment so beautifully, that is really hard." On another day, when Lady Hayo was accompanying Emperor Murakami, His Majesty stopped for a moment in the senior courtier's chamber, which was empty at the time, and noticing that some smoke was coming out of the square brazier, said, "What can that be?" "Go and have a look." Lady Hayo went and examined the brazier, then returned with this delightful poem, which she recited to the emperor. "What do I see in the open sea, or a flame in the open fire? It must be a frying frog I see, or a woman diver rowing home." In fact, a frog had jumped into the fire and was burning away. Sei Shōnagon, Makura no Soshi, The Pillow Book, Chapter 116. When I first went into waiting at Her Majesty's court, so many different things embarrassed me that I could not even reckon them up, and I was always on the verge of tears. As a result, I tried to avoid appearing before the Empress except at night, and even then I stayed hidden behind a 3-foot curtain of state. On one occasion, Her Majesty brought out some pictures and showed them to me, but I was so ill at ease that I could hardly stretch out my hand to take them. She pointed to one picture after another, explaining what each represented. Since the lamp had been put on a low tray stand, one could view the pictures even better than in the daytime, and every hair of my head was clearly visible. I managed to control my embarrassment and had a proper look. It was a very cold time of the year, and when Her Majesty gave me the paintings, I could hardly see her hands. But from what I made out, they were of a light pink hue that I found extraordinarily attractive. I gazed at the Empress with amazement. Simple as I was, and unaccustomed to such wonderful sights, I did not understand how a being like this could possibly exist in our world. At dawn, I was about to hurry back to my room when Her Majesty said, "Even the god of Kazuyoraki would stay a little longer." So I sat down again, but I leant forward sideways in such a way that Her Majesty could not see me directly, and kept the lattice shut. One of the ladies who came into the room noticed this, and said that it should be opened. A servant heard her and started towards it, but Her Majesty said, "Wait. Leave the lattice as it is." The two women went out, laughing to each other. Her Majesty then asked me various questions, and finally said, "I am sure you want to return to your room. So off you go. But be sure to come again this evening, and early too." As soon as I had crept out of Her Majesty's presence and was back in my room, I threw open all the lattices and looked out at the magnificent snow. During the day, I received several notes from Her Majesty telling me to come while it was still light. "The sky is clouded with snow," she wrote, "and no one will be able to see you clearly." Noticing my hesitation, the lady in charge of my room urged me, saying, "I don't know how you can stay shut up like this all day long. Her Majesty has granted you the extraordinary good fortune of being admitted into her presence, and she must certainly have her reasons. To be unresponsive to another person's kindness is a most hateful way to behave." This was enough to make me hurry back to the Empress, but I was overcome with embarrassment, and it was not easy for me. On my way, I was delighted to see the snow beautifully piled on top of the fire huts. When I entered Her Majesty's room, I noticed that the usual square brazier was full to the brim with burning charcoal, and that no one was sitting next to it. The Empress herself was seated in front of a round brazier made of shen wood and decorated with pear skin lacquer. She was surrounded by a group of high-ranking ladies who were in constant attendance upon her. In the next part of the room, a tightly packed row of ladies, waiting, sat in front of a long, rectangular brazier, with their Chinese jackets worn in such a way that they trailed on the floor. Observing how experienced they were in their duties and how easily they carried them out, I could not help feeling envious. There was not a trace of awkwardness in any of their movements as they got up to deliver notes to Her Majesty from the outside and sat down again by the brazier, talking and laughing to each other. When would I ever be able to manage like that? I wondered nervously. Still further in the back of the room sat a small group of ladies who were looking at pictures together. After a while, I heard the voices of outrunners loudly ordering people to make way. "His Excellency, the Chancellor, is coming," said one of the ladies, and they all cleared away their scattered belongings. I retired to the back of the room, but despite my modesty, I was curious to see the great man in person, and I peeped through a crack at the bottom of the curtain of state where I was sitting. It turned out that it was not Michitaka, but his son, Korchika, the major counselor. The purple of his court cloak and trousers looked magnificent against the white snow. "I should not have come," he said, standing next to one of the pillars, "because both yesterday and today are days of abstinence. But it has been snowing so hard that I felt bound to call and find out whether all was well with you." "How did you manage?" said Her Majesty. "I thought that all the paths were buried." "Well," replied Korchika, "it occurred to me that I might move your heart. Could anything surpass this conversation between the Empress and her brother?" This was the sort of exchange that is so eloquently described in romances, and the Empress herself, arrayed in a white dress, a robe of white Chinese damask, and 2 more layers of scarlet damask over which her hair hung down loosely at the back, had a beauty that I had seen in paintings but never in real life. It was all like a dream. Korchika joked with the ladies, in waiting, and they replied without the slightest embarrassment, freely arguing with him and contradicting his remarks when they disagreed. I was absolutely dazzled by it all and found myself blushing without any particular reason. Korchika ate a few fruits and told one of the servants to offer some to the Empress. He must have asked who was behind the curtain of state, and one of the ladies must have told him that it was I, for he stood up and walked to the back of the room. At first I thought he was leaving, but instead he came and sat very close to me. He began to talk about various things he had heard about me before I came into waiting and asked whether they were true. I had been embarrassed enough when I had been looking at him from a distance with the curtain of state between us. Now that we were actually facing each other, I felt extremely stupid and could hardly believe that this was really happening to me. In the past, when I had gone to watch Imperial processions and the like, Korchika had sometimes glanced in the direction of my carriage, but I had always pulled the inner blinds close together and hidden my face behind a fan for fear that he might see my silhouette through the blinds. I wondered how I could ever have chosen to embark on a career for which I was so ill-suited by nature. What on earth should I say to him? I was bathed in sweat and altogether in a terrible state. To make matters worse, Korchika now seized the fan behind which I had prudently hidden myself, and I realized that my hair must be scattered all over my forehead in a terrible mess. No doubt everything about my appearance bespoke the embarrassment I felt at that moment. I had hoped Korchika would leave quickly, but he showed no sign of doing so. Instead, he sat there, toying with my fan and asking who had done the paintings on it. I kept my head lowered and pressed the sleeve of my Chinese jacket to my face, so tightly indeed that bits of powder must have stuck to it, making my complexion all mottled. The Empress, who no doubt realized how desperately I wanted Korchika to leave, turned to him and said, "Look at this notebook. Whose writing do you suppose it is?" I was relieved to think that now he would finally go, but instead he asked her to have the book brought to him so that he could examine it. "Really?" she said. "You can perfectly well come here yourself and have a look." "No, I can't," he replied. "Shonagon has got hold of me and won't let go." It was a very fashionable sort of joke, but hardly suited to my rank or age, and I felt terribly ill at ease. Her Majesty held up the book, in which something had been written in a cursive script, and looked at it. "Well, indeed," said Korchika. "Whose can it be?" "Let's show it to Shonagon. I am sure she can recognize the handwriting of anyone in the world." The aim of all these absurd remarks, of course, was to draw me out. As if a single gentleman were not enough to embarrass me, another one now arrived, preceded by outrunners who cleared the way for him. This gentleman, too, was wearing a court cloak, and he looked even more splendid than Korchika. He sat down and started telling some amusing stories, which delighted the ladies in waiting. "Oh yes," they said, laughing. "We saw Lord Sonde, so when he was..." As I heard them mention the names of one senior courtier after another, I felt they must be talking about spirits or heavenly beings who had descended to earth. Yet, after some time had passed, and I had grown accustomed to court service, I realized that there had been nothing very impressive about their conversation. No doubt these same ladies, who talked so casually to Lord Korchika, had been just as embarrassed as I when they first came into waiting, but had little by little become used to court society until their shyness had naturally disappeared. The Empress spoke to me for a while and then asked, "Are you really fond of me?" "But Your Majesty," I replied, "how could I possibly not be fond of you?" Just then someone sneezed loudly in the table room. "Oh dear," said the Empress. "So you're telling a lie." Well, so be it, and she retired into the back of the room. To think that Her Majesty believed I was lying. If I had said that I was fairly fond of her, that would have been untrue. The real liar, I thought, was the sneezer's nose. Who could have done such a terrible thing? I dislike sneezes at the best of times, and whenever I feel like sneezing myself, I deliberately smother it. All the more hateful was it that someone should have sneezed at this moment. but I was still far too inexperienced to say anything that might have repaired the damage. And, since the day was dawning, I retired to my room. As soon as I arrived, a servant brought me an elegant-looking letter, written on fine, smooth paper of light green. "This is what Her Majesty feels," I read. "How, if there were no god Tadasu in the sky, and none to judge, what is the truth and what a lie? How should I know which words were falsely said?" My emotions were a jumble of delight and dismay, and once again I wished I could find out who had sneezed on the previous night. "Please give Her Majesty the following reply," I said, "and help me to make up for the harm that has been done." A simple sneeze might give the lie to one whose love is small, but sad indeed that she who truly loves should suffer from so slight a thing. The curse of God Shiki is of course very terrible. Even after I had sent my reply, I still felt most unhappy and wondered why someone should have had to sneeze at such an inopportune moment. Sei Shōnagon, Makura no Soshi, The Pillow Book, Chapter 117. A man who sneezes before anyone else on the morning of New Year's Day. A man who has obtained an appointment as chamberlain for his dear son at a time when the competition is very keen. A man who has received the governorship of one of the first-class provinces that is being offered in the current period of official appointments. "What a splendid appointment," people say and congratulate him warmly, to which he smugly replies, "How so?" "I've been ruined." A young man who has been chosen out of several candidates to be adopted as son-in-law. An exorcist who has succeeded in bringing a very stubborn spirit under control. A player in a game of hidden rhymes who quickly discovers the concealed character. During a small bow contest, one of the archers coughs. The man who is about to shoot is distracted by the sound and becomes nervous, but he manages to control himself, and his arrow shoots off with a loud twang, hitting the target. How pleased he looks with himself. In a game of Go, a greedy player switches his attention to a different part of the board, not quite realizing what a large number of stones he is likely to capture there. His opponent is unable to keep his eyes in the new sector, and the greedy player manages to win several stones. Oh, how pleased he looks. He laughs proudly, feeling happier about this windfall than he would about an ordinary gain. At long last, a man has received the governorship for which he has been waiting. He looks radiantly happy. In the past, everyone treated him with rudeness and disdain, but painful as it was, he bore it all patiently, realizing that he had no choice. Now even his superiors respect the man and play up to him with remarks like, "I am entirely at your excellency's service." He is attended by women and surrounded by elegant furnishings and clothing that he has never known before. Seeing all this, one wonders whether he can really be the same man whom even simple servants used to scorn. Then this fortunate governor is appointed middle captain in the inner palace guards. Oh, what a triumphant look he has on his face. To be a captain of the guards seems far grander to him than it would to a young nobleman who received the same appointment. High office is, after all, a most splendid thing. A man who holds the 5th rank or who serves as gentleman in waiting is liable to be despised. But when this same man becomes a major counselor, great minister, or the like, one is overawed by him and feels that nothing in the world could be as impressive. Of course, even a provincial governor has a position that should impress one, for after serving in several provinces, he may be appointed senior assistant governor, general, and promoted to the 4th rank, and when this happens, the high court nobles themselves appear to regard him with respect. After all, women really have the worst time of it. There are, to be sure, cases where the nurse of an emperor is appointed assistant attendant or given the 3rd rank and thus acquires great dignity. Yet it does her little good, since she is already an old woman. Besides, how many women ever attain such honors? Those who are reasonably well-born consider themselves lucky if they can marry a governor and go down to the provinces. Of course, it does sometimes happen that the daughter of a commoner becomes the principal consort of a high court noble, and that the daughter of a high court noble becomes an empress. Yet even this is not as splendid as when a man rises by means of promotions. How pleased such a man looks with himself. Who pays any attention to a palace chaplain when he walks by? Though he may recite the scriptures in a most impressive manner and may even be quite good looking, women despise a low, ranking priest, which is very sad for him. Yet, when this same man becomes a bishop or archbishop, people are overwhelmed with awe and respect, and everyone is convinced that the Buddha himself has appeared among them. Sei Shōnagon, Makura no Soshi, The Pillow Book, Chapter 118. A stormy wind. At dawn, when one is lying in bed with the lattices and paneled doors wide open, the wind suddenly blows into the room and stings one's face, most delightful. A cold, wintry wind. In the third month, the moist, gentle wind that blows in the evenings moves me greatly. Also moving is the cool, rainy wind in the 8th and 9th months. Streaks of rain are blown violently from the side, and I enjoy watching people cover their stiff robes of unlined silk with the padded coats that they put away after the summer rains. In this season, they would like to dispense even with their unlined robes, which have become quite sweltering. Instead, they are caught off guard by the sudden change in weather and have to dress still more warmly than before. Towards the end of the 9th month and the beginning of the 10th, the sky is clouded over. There is a strong wind, and the yellow leaves fall gently to the ground, especially from the cherry trees and the elms. All this produces a most pleasant sense of melancholy. In the 10th month, I love gardens that are full of trees. Sei Shōnagon, Makura no Soshi, The Pillow Book, Chapter 119. On the day after a fierce autumn wind, everything moves one deeply. The garden is in a pitiful state, with all the bamboo and lattice fence knocked over and lying next to each other on the ground. It is bad enough if the branches of one of the great trees have been broken by the wind, but it is a really painful surprise to find that the tree itself has fallen down and is now lying flat over the bush, clover, and the valerians. As one sits in one's room looking out, the wind, as though on purpose, gently blows the leaves one by one through the chinks of the lattice window, and one finds it hard to believe that this is the same wind which yesterday raged so violently. On one such morning, I caught sight of a woman creeping out from the main hall and emerging a few feet onto the veranda. I could see that she was a natural beauty. Over a dress of dull purple, she wore an unlined robe of tawny cloth and a formal robe of some light material. The noise of the wind must have kept her awake during the night, and she had just got up after sleeping late. Now she knelt on the veranda and looked into her mirror. With her long hair being blown about and gently puffed up by the wind, she was a truly splendid sight. As she gazed at the scene of desolation in the garden, a girl of about 17, not a small girl, but still not big enough to be called grown up, joined her on the veranda. She wore a night dress of light violet, and over that a faded blue robe of stiff silk, which was badly coming apart at the seams and wet from the rain. Her hair, which was cut evenly at the ends like miscanthus in a field, reached all the way down to her feet, falling onto the veranda beyond the bottom of her robe. Looking at her from the side, I could make out the scarlet of her skirt, the only bright touch in her costume. In the garden, a group of maids and young girls were collecting the flowers and plants that the wind had torn up by the roots, and were propping up some that were less damaged. Several women were gathered in front of me by the blind, and I enjoyed seeing how envious they looked as they watched the young people outside and wished that they might join them. Sei Shōnagon, Makura no Soshi, The Pillow Book, Chapter 120. I love the sound of the flute. It is beautiful when one hears it gradually approaching from the distance, and also when it is played nearby and then moves far away until it becomes very faint. There is nothing so charming as a man who always carries a flute when he goes out on horseback or on foot. Though he keeps the flute tucked in his robe, and one cannot actually see it, one enjoys knowing it is there. I particularly like hearing familiar tunes played on a flute. It is also very pleasant at dawn to find that a flute had been left next to one's pillow by a gentleman who has been visiting one. Presently, he sends a messenger to fetch the instrument, and when one gives it to him carefully wrapped up, it looks like an elegant next morning letter. A 13-pipe flute is delightful when one hears it in a carriage on a bright, moonlit night. True, it is bulky and rather awkward to play, and what a face people make when they blow it. But they can look ungraceful with ordinary flutes also. The flageolet is a very shrill instrument. The autumn insect it most resembles being the long cricket. It makes a terrible noise, especially when it is played badly, and it is not something one wants to hear nearby. I remember one of the special festivals at Kamo, when the musicians had not yet come into His Majesty's presence. One could hear the sound of their flutes from behind the trees, and I was just thinking how delightful it was when suddenly the flageolets joined in. They became shriller and shriller, until all the ladies, even those who were most beautifully groomed, felt their hair standing on end. Then the procession came before the emperor, with all the string and wind instruments playing in splendid unison.